Well, joining me now is Mike Fisher. Now, Mike is a co-founder of the British Association of Anger Management and author of a book called Beating Anger, which I thought was a very clever title. Let's talk now to Mike. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, look at us. We match beautifully. If you're watching this on watching this on YouTube, we look very pretty together, Mike. We look lovely.
Well, in fact, I noticed that. I thought she's wearing virtually the same colours as mine. Yours are all stripy and yours are vertical and mine are horizontal.
Beautiful. We look pretty as a picture. We really do. We look lovely. Now, listen, Mike, I just asked the question, though, why are we so angry? Because on the anger index, we are getting more and more angry. And not only are we feeling angry, but we're acting out on that anger.
Well, I was having a conversation with your producer this afternoon.
The lovely Gabriella.
And correct. And I'm writing my new book at the moment, which is called The Currency of Love. So I'm kind of deep into the process. And we published it 2025, probably December of next year. And I'm quite glad she asked me the question that you're asking me now, because what I want to say about why we're getting as angry as we do is because of the sense of profound powerlessness. People feel powerless, they feel hopeless, they feel helpless. And their way of managing or mismanaging those levels of distress tend to manifest either as depression or as aggression. Notice I'm not using the word anger. Now, what's interesting about depression is that depression is anger turned inwards. So they're still feeling as angry as they are, even though they're depressed. But those of us who suffer from anger without being able to contain it or to self-regulate, we then, of course, act it out. Now, from a statistic point of view, what we've identified is, yes, anger is on the increase. And we get anything between 10,000 to 12,000 people a month coming to our website. And during the school holidays, of course, there's this drop of people coming to our website. But as soon as school holidays are over, they're packing into our anger management programs. And of course, they're going back to our website simply because they need to deal with their anger. Anger does not go away. But just to continue answering your question about why we feel as angry as we do, I think there's also something to be said, and I think you mentioned it when you used the example of how angry we get in our motor vehicles. There's something about self-entitlement, moral superiority, arrogance, lacking humility, not being able to be empathetic and compassionate towards others. So those are some examples of why we're getting as angry as we are. But keeping in mind, we've always been angry. The only difference is that today there's strategies, there's workshops, there's books on the subject. So at this point, there's no reason for us to act our anger out. And that's the distinction that I want to make. Anger is me simply saying to you, I'm angry with you. That's it. It's no more complicated than that. But when I start to scream and shout, hurl abuse, either become aggressive, what we call active aggressive, or passive aggressive, where we kind of suck it in and we find our own passive ways of punishing the other person, that is a no-no. So what I often say to people is, be as angry as you want to be. You don't have to act it out.
Because, I mean, anger is in our DNA, right? It's a protective instinct. It's an animal instinct. You see it in the animal kingdom, where you'll get a lion suddenly turn around and growl and spit, and that is saying, I'm angry, back off, right? Move away. But unless the other creature comes at them, they don't tend to act that out. Feeling angry is normal, isn't it? What happens is when we act out that anger and become violent or aggressive.
Yes. But it's interesting when you use animals, for example, a lion, they're very territorial. I think as human beings, we also have strong animal instincts. We're also very territorial. So I think there's something to be said is when not only we are threatened by what somebody might or might not do, behave or not behave in the way that we'd like them to, is there's something about our possessions, there's something about our homes, there's something about our vehicles that we want to protect. But the question is, what exactly is it that we're protecting ourselves from? And that's the million-dollar question, actually.
The thing is, though, that it seems to me as well that there are a lot of emotions that we put out on display now that we never used to. Right, I mean, the old image of the stiff upper lip Brit, you know, you don't cry, you don't particularly laugh, you don't get angry, you don't display emotions. But it seems to be more acceptable. I mean, there was that man, I'm trying to remember his name now, Potts, was it, who screamed at that woman in the car park and ended up in court for it. And he didn't mind, Peter Abbott, he didn't mind being observed behaving in this utterly, ridiculously over-the-top, angry manner. He didn't mind. He didn't seem to be embarrassed by it. He didn't seem to mind at all that he was being observed. And even when another man said to him, look, do you see what you're doing? Do you see what you're doing? You're screaming at a defenceless woman in her car. And he then started swearing and saying what kind of woman that she was. And he's then going to court and going, well, everybody gets angry.
You see, I mean, that's an interesting example because that's not anger. That's total blatant and utter aggression.
Yes.
And there is something to be said about the British public today where people are finding the courage to step outside of their own comfort zone rather than to suck it in. And from my perspective, it's much healthier expressing it than sucking it in, because if I suck it in, I end up becoming depressed. So I do say it's healthier out as opposed to in, but I think there is distinctions. Be as angry as you want to be, is what I say, and you can still keep your heart open. And what I mean by that, I can still try and see it from the other person's perspective. One of the rules of anger management is to stop, think, take a look at the big picture. But our capacity to even see the big picture when we're angry, it becomes limited. And so from my perspective, it's about being able to expand our awareness beyond our own narcissistic and self-importance paradigm, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, it does. But there is something very specific that goes on, as I mentioned, with driving. In that people, I mean, I am laid back, right? I am laid back. And if somebody wants to pull in front of me, I go, do you know what? Like I said, I haven't got the nuclear codes. I'm not, you know, nobody's going to die if I'm an extra 5 seconds late to wherever I'm going. But I see so much aggression and, I mean, it's disproportionate. It's so disproportionate. It's like somebody got in the wrong lane. Give them a break. What is wrong with you? But it's this instant, it just seems to be just like an explosion that goes off, a disproportionate, embarrassing explosion. And I just think, take a look at yourself. What are you doing? So what is that about? Why is that instant anger, that really, so it's really surface stuff?
Well, first of all, Britain has already been identified as the biggest road ragers in Europe, which is statistically accurate.
Wow.
Now, in my first book, Beating Anger, I do talk about automobile rage. That's how the Americans call it. But what's interesting in what you're describing, it didn't start when somebody cut me off or blocked the road or drove at tortoise pace. It happened a couple of days ago, weeks ago, possibly even months ago. But you see, when we're in our automobiles, in our vehicles, we can then justify our anger, rage, and fury because somebody else is putting our life in danger. So, you know, earlier on we were talking about territorial. When we are in our motor vehicles, we become incredibly territorial and we become very brave simply because we're in a safe steel or tin container. And that gives us, I don't know what you describe it, but it gives us that opportunity to act our anger out and justified because the other person put our lives and our children's lives possibly in danger. So that's the excuse that they use. But you said it yourself. It's disproportionate to the situation or the event itself. But the key here, it didn't start when somebody cut me off or put me in a situation or my family in a situation where we could have had an accident or possibly even been killed. That's how they're justified. Not cool.
Like I said earlier, though, when on the way into work the other day, this woman, I mean, it was so shameful. I was embarrassed for her. It was a tiny misdemeanor. I'd seen the whole thing happen.
Yes.
And she got out of her car and was squaring up to this poor woman in her car. And it was, I just thought, honestly, somebody should film you. I was on my way to work, but somebody should film you and play that back to you and go, is this who you really are? Is this what you want the world to think you are? Because it was embarrassing. It was completely pathetic, but scary for the person who was being attacked by her.
Absolutely. But let me just come back to that first question you asked, which is about, are we getting angrier? Now, another way of looking at what you've just described is that stress fuels anger. In our anger management programs, one of the things that we start with is helping people to de-stress. Stress fuels anger. So if we have a nation of incredibly stressed out human beings because they're spinning so many different plates all the time and it doesn't stop all day and all night, that does suggest that their levels of stress and anxiety overwhelms them. And how does it get expressed? We could then say that actually anger could be cathartic. It's a way of kind of dumping whatever frustration and stress is actually built up internally. And that's a fantastic opportunity to act out in the way that they do. I mean, from my perspective, it's really unhealthy. And I also recognize that it's heartbreaking, especially for the person who's being hurled abuse at or screamed and shouted at, etc.
Because it just does seem so, like this man, Peter Abbott, it just so disproportionate. It's like, what the hell? You know, I don't know if he's embarrassed by it. You know, it just,
Probably
you should
not.
be embarrassed by it. How do we, so look, I know it's up to us to control it. What's your number one tip? I mean, I think I'm overly empathetic, so I look at somebody and go, oh, shame, he's just in the wrong lane. What a shame. But I have to be, I like being empathetic. It's how I do this job well. But what is your number one tip for people who are raging inside? How do you change that?
Well, look, I think according to the program that I deliver, we have 6 rules of anger management. But if I can just give 2 tips, because I think they both work hand in hand. The one is to stop and take a look at the big picture. Not just see the world through our own prism or rose-tinted glasses, but to actually realize that every single one of us are doing the best we possibly can with all the limitations that are imposed on us and that we impose on ourselves.
Yes.
So that's, I think, the starting point. And I think it's really difficult if you are already an angry person to actually see the bigger picture. And when I talk about seeing the bigger picture, I am talking about being able to empathize and be compassionate at the same time. But if you have that strong sense of entitlement, it's very, very difficult to do that. That's the first one. Excuse me. The second one is don't take anything personally. Now, some of your listeners must be thinking, how the hell do I do that? Now, I must just tell you, I actively engage in my own program because I have my own history of anger. That's why I'm so good at what I do, because I can identify and understand why people get as angry as they do. But I can tell you, that was one of the most difficult rules for me to integrate. It took me about 23 years, and I've been delivering anger management programs for 24 years. I've been in the business as a therapist for over 38 years. But I can't tell you how unbelievably difficult it was. And the sleight of hand that I had to use in order to integrate and embrace that particular rule was to say to myself, hey, Mike, you don't have to take it personally. And it's almost like a healthy, loving, caring parent reminding that 16-year-old schoolboy thug inside of me that I don't have to personalize it.
Yeah.
Now, of course, to actually look at it about how do you do that, that's what we teach on our programs. But if I keep it quite brief, but what I have to do is that I've got to be able to identify why I take things personally. That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Now, I'm the kind of person, I take things very personally simply because it reinforces on some level what kind of failure I actually am. So what I'm talking about there is like what is defined as negative core belief. So like my negative core belief is, however hard I try, I can never get anything right. So I must be a failure. But none of that's true because there's no evidence to suggest that. But if your audience are interested in exploring that, maybe what they can do is to look up this idea of what is a negative core belief and where did it come from and how does that limit my own potential? So that's what I've had to do, is to challenge this idea that I'm a failure because there's no evidence to suggest that. Have I failed? Hell yes, of course I failed. That does not equate to me being a failure.
No.
But that's the negative core belief. That's the script running in my head.
And we all have that, imposter syndrome,
yes.
or all of those things. This is absolutely fascinating. How do people get onto your website?
Well, it's www.angermanage.co.uk.
And you've got a Twitter as well, which is @AngerManageUK. I've loved talking to you, Mike, and I love the way we dress. We must go out sometime. Mike Fisher, thank you very, very much indeed. Co-founder of the British Association of Anger Management and author of Beating Anger. And that is what we're going to be talking about. Why is it we are so angry? When was the last time you came across somebody that was really raging? Or maybe it was you. Give me a call.